Essentially, Jeff Bezos sees AI as the new electricity. AI is going to become sort of that fundamental utility in some ways that is just integral to everything at some point. That was his contention.
Well, it's going to take a lot of electricity. I don't know if we talk about that.
Hi, and welcome to GeekWire. I'm GeekWire co-founder Todd Bishop.
And I'm GeekWire co-founder John Cook.
We are coming to you from Las Vegas,
woo,
where Amazon is holding its annual Amazon Web Services reInvent conference. It's kind of like the Super Bowl of the cloud or Disneyland of distributed computing, I've been thinking of it. And we are here on the expo floor at the GeekWire Studios booth. John and I have been here all week. I've been covering all of the announcements. John, you've been handling things on the business side, having meetings. What has it been like for you to attend your first Amazon reInvent?
First thing I would say is dry. As you know, I am so dried out here in the desert. I need to get back to the misty and rainy Pacific Northwest.
So you've been sitting in on the keynotes with me and getting a sense for what Amazon has announced. I've been covering all of the news that I can, meeting with Amazon executives. For me, one of the most interesting parts this year, apart from having you as a pair of fresh eyes alongside me, which has been a lot of fun, by the way. I've really enjoyed having you here.
Well, thank you.
It has been Andy Jassy, the Amazon CEO, returning to this event. We're going to talk about that a little later on, plus some highlights from Jeff Bezos and his conversation on the other side of the country at the DealBook Summit, which relates to some of the things that have been happening here. But it was also the first Amazon Web Services reInvent for Matt Garman, the new AWS CEO. So a lot of firsts this week.
Yeah, and of course we heard a lot about generative AI, as we knew we would. But the thing that surprised me the most was the amount of focus on Amazon's silicon and their chips. A good chunk of the keynote from Matt Garman really dealt with their chip strategy and how they're going to take on NVIDIA.
And by the way, we are going to be talking later on about Amazon Nova, the new foundation frontier models from Amazon. But if you think about it, the underlying silicon, the chips, are the fundamental infrastructure that's required to power this new era. And Amazon.
Largely it's been powered by NVIDIA. And NVIDIA has a big presence here in Vegas at AWS reInvent. But I was struck by how much Amazon really was doubling down on that. And you had the story on Apple Computer came out on stage. That's largely what they talked about. And you talked about that as a unique component to have Apple here talking about their use of Amazon chips and a number of their services. So that was the most surprising thing to me. And I think it goes back to, was Annapurna Labs is who Amazon purchased several years ago, which really formed the basis for this expansion by Amazon into the semiconductor field.
That's right. And Amazon, in addition to Trainium, which is primarily the chip for training artificial intelligence, also has Inferentia, which is its chip for running artificial intelligence workloads. And the key thing here that I heard from Matt Garman and Andy Jassy on stage is that historically, Amazon has had three building blocks for its Amazon Web Services cloud unit. That is compute, storage, and database. And what they're attempting to do with the release of these new chips, with the new Nova model that they're coming out with, is add a fourth, which is inference. And the whole notion that every app, every service in the future, they believe, will have some component of artificial intelligence inference, the idea of running an AI model, incorporating it into the basics of every service.
Yeah, and Todd, I know we were talking about this at some of the numerous dinners and happy hours that we've been to, but another trend that really, it wasn't really a trend, it's more of a talking point. That's one of the interesting things about being at a conference like this, is you pick up on what the themes that they're emphasizing. It's not so much the individual announcements, it's the repetitive words they're using over and over again to hit on certain things. And one really stood out to me. Do you know what it is?
I don't know.
You don't know what it is? We were already talking about
Well, there
this.
were many. There were several.
Many.
So which was the one?
This idea that Amazon has always been an AI company.
Yes.
How could you possibly have missed how AI is built into all of these products over the last 20 years? This was hammered over and over again in every conversation I had with every Amazon person here. And I think the concept is hey, we've been around this AI business for a long time. You just don't really recognize what a leader we are in it. In part because the perception, rightly or wrongly in the market, is that Amazon is behind in AI. Now, the thing that strikes me as interesting with this is that that's not really a message you would have to put out there if you were truly in the lead, right? So it was very interesting just how many times and how much they emphasized AI as a key component of Amazon, not in the last 2 years, but in the last 20 years.
It's a bit of a case of thou doth protest too much, right? I mean, clearly they feel like people out there feel like they're behind in artificial intelligence. And to me, the key announcement this week in that regard was Nova. I want to talk about that when we come back. You're listening to GeekWire. We are on the show floor in the expo hall at AWS reInvent in Las Vegas. It's Todd Bishop and John Cook, and we will be right back. Welcome back. It's Todd Bishop and John Cook. We are coming to you from AWS reInvent on the expo floor at the GeekWire Studios booth in Las Vegas. John, before we go on and talk a little bit more about Amazon, why does GeekWire have a booth here?
Well, as you mentioned, it's part of our GeekWire Studios business, which is a great part of the GeekWire business where we create customized content, sponsored content on behalf of brands. Our team here, including Brian Westbrook and Steph Strickland, our hosts on GeekWire Studios, have been shooting over 50 videos on behalf of various sponsors, partners, thought leaders that are coming through the studios booth. I know they've got to be exhausted. Can you imagine doing 50 interviews over 3 days?
I can't.
This is intense, but they've been doing great work. End product will be short form videos that we're creating through the studios business.
Okay, let me throw this scenario by you. This is the characteristic of a specific business. Low cost, broad selection, products from Amazon and its selected vendors, plus a third-party marketplace. It sounds a lot like Amazon's e-commerce business. In fact, that also applies now to Amazon's AI initiatives. And Jason Del Rey on Fortune, the longtime reporter who's covered Amazon and has a great book out that has been featured on the GeekWire podcast in the past, had a really interesting article talking about the parallels between these two. But to your point earlier, I think last year at reInvent, Amazon was all about proving that it was in the AI game. To me, with things like Amazon Nova, they're completing this picture of Amazon using its classic playbook from e-commerce to apply to artificial intelligence.
Yeah, and not just the e-commerce playbook, really the playbook for Amazon. And that's one thing I've been thinking about here as we see all these announcements coming out of reInvent. AWS is a classic like skunkworks type of business. That's, I think, historically, it's the research and development arm of Amazon in many ways. Now, I don't think they'd classify it as that, but historically, they would prove out all these things that they needed to power their additional services, right? I mean, that's essentially how AWS came to be.
It started inside Amazon where they were doing these things for themselves, and then they said, well, we're finding these things useful.
Right.
Why don't we do this for everybody else as well?
So what I'm seeing with Nova and their AI introductions is very similar. It's
Yes.
like, hey, and it ties into the theme I was touching on earlier. Hey, we've been doing this stuff for 20 years. We're really good at it. We're just going to now productize it and roll it out to the rest of the market. I mean, right? That's the classic AWS model. So it's just very interesting how they're getting to the place of rolling these new products out.
I will say, just in terms of the behind the scenes stuff, I was fascinated by how in his element Jassy seemed on stage. It was kind of like he was the graduate who was back in front of his old high school class talking about all the interesting things he was doing at that larger level as they related to the Amazon Web Services business.
You know, I remember 6-7 years ago being on stage and we were talking about how everybody thought the TensorFlow was going to be the one AI framework. We kept saying there are going to be a lot of them, and there were. And it turns out that PyTorch ended up being the most popular one. And the same is going to be true for models. And we see this internally. What we've noticed as we've been building all these applications is that our internal builders have been asking for all sorts of things from our teams that are building models. They want better latency. They want lower cost. They want the ability to do fine-tuning. They want the ability to better orchestrate across their different knowledge bases to be able to ground their data. They want to take lots of automated orchestrated actions, or what people call agentic behavior. They want better image and video. They want a whole bunch of things. And we share that feedback with our model provider partners, and they're very receptive, but they're busy. I mean, you guys want a lot. There's a lot to do. And so it's one of the reasons why we have continued to work on our own frontier models. And those frontier models have made a tremendous amount of progress over the last 4 to 5 months. And we figured if we were finding value out of them, you would probably find value out of them. So I'm excited to share and announce the launch of Amazon Nova, which are our new state-of-the-art foundation models that deliver frontier intelligence and industry-leading price performance.
Amazon Nova. By the way, my theory on the name is that eventually there'll be something called supernova.
Oh, that's clever. Yes.
One of the things I'm going to be looking forward to actually seeing is the Nova model called Nova Reel, which is for studio quality video generation, starting with 6-second clips. And one of the things we asked him was, why 6 seconds? Why not 5 seconds? And Vishal, who we talked with from Amazon, explained that really has become a standard for advertisers in some of the short video clips.
Yeah, now we should say next year they're going to bring that up to 2 minutes.
Right.
But you really can see the component of how that could impact entertainment, media, certainly advertising, where you can create AI-generated quick form video for your marketing messages, advertising. Very interested to see how that plays out.
Just continuing the comparisons to the retail, and I find these kinds of analogies very useful in terms of understanding new things. There was a great thread on Hacker News, Y Combinator News, that explained how to think about Anthropic's models compared to Nova. Anthropic, of course, is the maker of Claude, and they're a key Amazon partner. They're a company that Amazon has now invested $8 billion in. And the question from a lot of people this week was, well, wait, you've got this partnership with Anthropic. Why do you need something like Nova? And this Hacker News thread is really interesting. Again, comparing it to retail. Think of Anthropic like you would think of Duracell batteries in Costco, and think of Nova like you would think of the Costco brand, Kirkland, where the retailer is coming in with its own alternative, and maybe it doesn't have the glitz and glamour and the sheen of the big brand, but a lot of people will go for it, and it's a lot cheaper. And that is one of the things that Amazon is beating the drum on. In fact, it's what I was wondering if you were going to bring up earlier, because that is certainly a consistent theme here, is they are offering Nova at a much lower cost than competing models that Amazon says are basically the same or less than Nova in terms of the benchmarks.
Yeah, and I think that's a key component of Amazon's model as well, looking at them historically. I mean, costs, obviously, Amazon has built their business on driving a lower margin business than most technology companies. So that's a really good analogy on the Costco Kirkland brand.
Or Amazon Basics. I don't mean to apply it to another retailer.
Yeah, well, that's right. And this was another talking point, cost. But another talking point that you heard throughout this, and I thought this is where you were going to go when you were mentioning the comparison to Anthropic, was this idea of choice. You heard this continuously throughout the conversations. Of course, there's Anthropic and OpenAI and Mistral and all these other AI models. But what humans really need and love and crave is choice. I mean, and you heard this through multiple people, and another key talking point is that, and this is this idea that you're just not stuck in one model. Now, when we were speaking to Vishal Sharma, who was the Amazon executive that gave us kind of the behind the scenes peek at everything going on with Nova, he did mention this idea that it's actually not in your interest as a company to kind of stick with one model. It was like, you need to actually be out there. It's changing so fast, and referencing AI, that it's in your interest and the interest of your customers to actually experiment with more of these models. Of course, experimenting with Nova as well.
Right, and this is where Amazon is headed with all of this, and it was fascinating because you could see that kind of trickle down. I think Jeff Bezos even mentioned it in his conversation with Andrew Ross Sorkin. Andy Jassy mentioned it on stage, and Vishal Sharma, as you mentioned, the AWS VP of AGI information, they kept saying, you don't go to just one expert as a human for information, so why would you just go and use one AI model?
True. I'm going to push back on that a little bit, though, because you do actually typically go to one CRM system,
right.
Salesforce, or you go to, in our case, you go to one platform to produce the content for GeekWire and WordPress. You know, we don't experiment with a lot of different content management systems. And to me, that would be the equivalent of like, oh, now maybe I'm missing the boat that these systems are really easy to test, and developers like playing in new sandboxes, and that's a valid argument. I just think the switching costs, once you get, and somebody does have a lot of functionality with something that's working for your business, why not stick with that?
And we talked about the switching costs, and there are different query languages that can be used with different models. That said, Amazon is trying to make this relatively seamless with its Bedrock generative AI service, which is what all of these models are available in, including Nova and Anthropic Claude and all of these different models that companies can use. And one of the things that they announced this week was that there will be, and there has launched already, a Bedrock marketplace as of this week. And again, you're continuing the retail analogies. There is the Amazon.com marketplace for retailers. And in much the same way, I think you're going to be able to see the path for Amazon's AI initiatives in the blueprint or the roadmap of its retail business.
Well, they do have an advantage. I mean, they have 65,000 people here,
yes.
Mainly developers and engineers, and this place is packed. I mean, it is, I don't know, I haven't been before, but you were even commenting on how crowded it feels. And so leveraging those people that are showing up here to learn, and a lot of these folks are already on AWS, a number of these other services, and they're having a largely, I would say, probably a good experience with those other services. And so it is the idea of just trying to get them into the new services that they're offering. And if they're at lower costs and easy to implement, which is the path that Amazon paves for these developers, you can see the potential path that they have to having some success with these new AI models they're rolling out.
So big picture, why this matters in the scheme of the businesses that we cover, Amazon, Microsoft, Google, is that AI really seems to be the accelerant for the cloud. It's one of the things that potentially is going to move people to the cloud or fuel the businesses of these major cloud platforms in the future. And that's one reason why we're paying attention to it. And it was interesting because for as much focus as we have on AI, and as Amazon clearly is looking at AI as a driver of its business, when I was asking people, I was just sitting over here, I was waiting, there's a basketball demo, a generative AI basketball demo where they analyze your shot. I'll have to let you know.
Oh, really? I missed that.
I was in line for it. I just did it. It was pretty cool. Anyway.
How'd you do?
I thought I did pretty dang well. I have to wait to see what the generative AI...
What the results. All right, well, you're going to have to post those. Yeah.
I will. But there was a developer behind me in line from Vancouver, and we were chatting, and with others as well. It seems like a lot of the focus is on those first three building blocks first. The storage, S3, the compute, EC2, the databases, Aurora, and others. And I think that still is where a lot of the focus is with these folks. And the question is AI actually going to be as fundamental to the future experience, at least in the near term and potentially in the medium term, as Amazon is betting, or as some of our reporting might even suggest? And Jeff Bezos actually had an interesting comment on that during his appearance at the DealBook Summit this week, and I want to talk about that when we come back. You're listening to GeekWire, and we will be right back. Welcome back. It's Todd Bishop with John Cook. We're on the show floor in the expo hall at AWS reInvent.
Our last day.
Yes.
You sad to leave? Not really.
4 days in Vegas is 4 days in Vegas.
That's right. I think you left the hotel once or maybe twice.
Twice, yeah.
Not much fresh air.
There's a lot of things just happening here on the show floor that are kind of fun. I wish I had one more day to experience that. But back at the DealBook Summit, Jeff Bezos talked with Andrew Ross Sorkin about this question of AI, and he had a really interesting analogy or comparison of his own. Let's listen to that now.
Right now, what is it that you're doing at Amazon?
AI. Yeah, so I mean, there are a few things, but it's 95% AI.
And where do you think?
It's just so, because we are literally working on 1,000 applications internally. So AI, you have to remember, modern AI is a horizontal enabling layer. It can be used to improve everything. It will be in everything. This is most like electricity. I went to a brewery in Luxembourg many years ago now. In fact, this trip was one of the little tiny catalysts for the founding of AWS. And the brewery was 300 years old. This company making beer for 300 years. A lot of the oldest companies in the world are breweries, by the way. I don't know why this is. And they were very proud of their history, and they had a museum. And in that museum was an electric power generator, 100 years old. And because when they wanted to improve the efficiency of their brewery with electricity, there was no power grid. So they had to build their own power station. So they made their own electricity. And at that time, that's what everybody did. If a hotel wanted electricity, they had their own electric generator. And I looked at this and I thought, this is what computation is like today. Everybody has their own data center. And that's not going to last. It makes no sense. You're going to buy compute off the grid. That's AWS. We were doing it internally at Amazon for ourselves, and the APIs were created. That's a very interesting story in its own right. But this is, these kind of horizontal layers like electricity and compute and now artificial intelligence, they go everywhere. I guarantee you there is not a single application that you can think of that is not going to be made better by AI.
I mean, he's probably right. I mean, I think AI will eventually touch everything we do. I mean, some of the demos we were seeing here in terms of how it impacts our work in journalism, I mean, it's real, it's coming, right? In terms of how you are using it to create content. I was watching you write your story during the Garmin keynote, and it was impressive how you were just multitasking between your note-taking and using AI to find certain information. So I do think this is probably right, that it will touch almost every industry, and companies that are at the forefront of it, that experiment with it and are able to use it to automate certain functions will progress, and those that don't will probably fall behind. So I do think it will touch everything, every business. I think it will take a while for us to get there.
And people might be curious, and I'll just share briefly, maybe this can be a My AI segment. We'll spare you the theme music for now. Don't do it. It's too many days in Vegas. Don't sing. But I have Otter AI running during the keynotes on my computer. It's giving me a live transcript of what they're saying.
It's amazing.
And since I'm also taking photos.
Which you can search for key quotes.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah,
so that's
cool.
what I do. I use the AI embedded into Otter, and the fact that it's still transcribing the interview, and you can go in and say, what did he say about SageMaker, or what did he say about DynamoDB, or whatever, that to me is key. And then of course, my thing is I always go and say, well, let me look at the actual transcript and make sure that it's correct. But it's a tool to get to the answer faster. Because I'm sitting there, you see it, I've got my DSLR camera tethered to my computer, I'm snapping photos. I mean, it was nice to have you here this week, and in fact, you helped me on a headline on the fly, which was really helpful. But usually I'm just a one-person show at these things, so I've kind of got my system down, and usually it's just me.
Well, what was it that you took out of the Bezos comment that resonated with you?
To me, the inevitability of it all, and also the fact that Bezos has been right a lot in the past. Now, he'll admit when he's wrong, but if you look at the bets that he's made, most notably on Amazon, AWS, now not every bet.
Fire phone.
I was just going to say, I was there at the Fire phone unveiling too. I mean, clearly he has made some mistakes, but this is a fundamental thing. This isn't a new smartphone. This is a fundamental change in the way that business is going to get done. And the other thing here, we get to focus so much on enterprise technology because of the traditional strengths of the Seattle market and the Pacific Northwest, the larger Seattle region. That really is the nitty-gritty, the plumbing. And to me, it's actually been kind of cool because I think the near-term benefits, the biggest ones, are in the enterprise applications, in the enterprise services, the back end, all of the solutions behind the scenes, and not so much in the consumer stuff right now, the front-facing stuff. And you've seen Microsoft struggle a bit with some of its Copilot rollouts, and this is one of the moments where the companies that have bet on developing a lot of that core enterprise infrastructure are going to see a lot of the benefits.
Well, then how do you see Amazon potentially taking advantage of this, given all the announcements this week and where they're positioned?
I think in some ways, and this may be a contrarian opinion, I've been here for 4 days kind of immersed in all this. This might have been the reInvent someday when we look back on it, where Amazon showed that it had the formula for success. They are placing their chips, to use a Vegas metaphor, all over the table. And I think with the unveiling of Nova, they're able to kind of put themselves on the same level as the likes of Google, which was an interesting comment that you heard from one startup executive.
Yeah, I brought up Nova to one of the, actually a couple of startup founders I was sitting with for dinner, and I asked them what they thought, and they said, well, Amazon had to do this. And then I followed up and I said, well, are you going to use Nova? And they said, probably not.
Yeah.
And I thought that was interesting that they felt there was a need to do it, in part because of some of the competitive pressure that they had to have these products out in the market.
In other words, when they're vying for somebody's cloud business against Google, Google in the past would have been able to say, Amazon's not really serious about this. They don't even have their own foundation model. They're relying on Anthropic. You really need to bet with somebody who's been doing this for a while. So you can see where all the competitive messaging comes in, and you can see where that then would have been a motivation for Amazon to come out with its own model.
Yeah, and I think Amazon does still have the lead and is the market dominating player in cloud. And I think all these cloud services that are in the background that have been running successfully, I mean, I think that's Werner Vogels, the CTO of Amazon's keynote this morning, hit a lot on simplicity and that this stuff just works. And I think that was another theme you heard throughout the conference, this idea that it's practical applications. That word practical came up over and over again. We're not out there doing the stuff on the edges, just doing demos for fun. We're doing the nitty-gritty AI that actually will work for you and your businesses. And I think that idea will potentially resonate with a lot of those developers and engineers that are in the audience here.
I will tell you one of my favorite stories of the week, because I feel like we need to cover the competition between Microsoft and Amazon, not just at the cloud level, but all over the place. So just like a sports reporter in Los Angeles has to cover both the Clippers and the Lakers, and if there's a big game between the two of them, you focus on it. I tend to focus on
there's added buzz.
Yes,
Yeah.
Focus on the areas of competition between Microsoft and Amazon. And to me, in that regard, one of the fun stories of the week was Amazon announcing that its Amazon Q developer assistant will be able to migrate .NET apps, like legacy Microsoft apps, to Linux with essentially just a few strokes of the keyboard. And the comment from Matt Garman, the AWS CEO, was, everybody wants an easy button to get off of Windows.
I thought was very damning.
Well, this is a long time thing. This,
I know.
This has been something that Andy Jassy, dating back to his tenure as AWS CEO, was also beating the drum on. But to me, it's fascinating that now they're using AI to do this.
Well, it stood out because much of the conversation was about forward thinking, about where Amazon was going, their new products, their new announcements. And then all of a sudden, they just kind of threw Windows and Microsoft under the bus. It just seemed a little out of context on everything else they were doing. And you didn't hear them really call out any other competitors.
There was one moment during that keynote where they talked about, we aren't just helping you beat the world's best chess player or something like that, which was a
good point. I did write that.
Google.
Yeah, I did write that down in my notes, which did speak to the comments I was making earlier about they want to be practical. That came up again. We're not, and I think it was in that context that they brought that up. We're going to build applications, we're going to build services that help your business reach customers more successfully.
All right, John, this has been a lot of fun. Thank you for doing this. Any final thoughts on reInvent? Was it what you expected?
Yeah, it's a big customer conference and a lot of rah-rah at the end of the day. I mean, that's what it is. It's not a general tech conference, right? I mean, we're here because of Amazon, and Amazon is announcing products, and they are pushing certain messages that they want to reach to both press, but also to the developer engineer audience that's here. And I think picking up on some of the themes we talked about showcases where they're headed and what they're thinking about.
But it's also where their mindset is. And clearly, when you look at things like Microsoft Build, Microsoft Ignite, Google I/O, all of Google's developer conferences, that is their worldview, and they'll have their turn as well. It's going to be fascinating to see how this plays out over the next couple of years.
So Todd, one of the things you mentioned to me is that reInvent's always been a little bit quirky and unusual. Did you pick up on that vibe in any ways, and how it's different than Google or Microsoft's big customer conference? And does it still have that? Does that still resonate? Is that still a theme here?
It's got its own personality. Andy Jassy was doing his own LinkedIn videos, and frankly, I thought that was one of the neat things about this conference. In the past, you wouldn't have said that Andy Jassy was bringing star power to Amazon reInvent, but it was kind of cool that he was here bringing that bigger perspective. I think that might have been my favorite part of the event. I watched his LinkedIn videos, and it was interesting to hear the perspective of Amazon's CEO, given just how much he knows about AWS. And of course, in all of this, obviously he's the chief cheerleader for this stuff too, so you got to take it with a grain of salt. But for me, that was probably the most interesting twist on this year's reInvent, and the fact that they gave him the big announcement. He got to do the big announcement of Nova. All right, from the show floor at AWS reInvent, I'm Todd Bishop.
And I'm John Cook.
Curt Milton edited this episode. Thanks for listening. We'll talk to you next week on the GeekWire podcast.